Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm like, it only gives me the option to stop the video.
Ah, I paused it
Oh,
because
okay.
I started early. So,
All right. It
all
looks like
right.
it's on now.
It is
Yeah.
recording so that you know this is being recorded so we can post it later for people that can't attend live. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Lee, and on here with me is Lauren. We're LNL of the Lunch and Learn. We are merely your hosts. Today, we are happy to have Megan Barnes here talking about hunting dragons. I just want to do a little housekeeping before I hand it over to Megan. I'd really like everyone to mute yourselves if you haven't already and turn off your cameras too, so we have a nice clean screen for everybody. We are going to be taking questions. If you have a burning question or something that you want to discuss either during or at the end of this presentation, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Lauren's going to be managing the chat. If it's something that we feel is needing to be addressed in the moment, we'll interrupt Megan because she said she was cool with that. And we'll throw that question at her and have a quick talk about that. If it's something that we feel can wait till the end, Lauren will hold your question. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A with Megan. So again, if you have questions, just go ahead and pop them up in the chat and Lauren will be monitoring that for you. I think that's everything. I will keep an eye on this waiting room. I think that's it. Again, we are recording this and it will be posted on the website for members later. So if you want to review it again, it will be there for you. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to you, Megan.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura Lee.
You're welcome.
It's so nice to have hosts for my meeting. I don't have to check my own chat. It's very exciting. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you today about a project that we've been working on for about a season and a half. We're about to go in the field again in the next couple of weeks for the next season. And I've been working on it with one of my dogs, Evie. It's just a little pilot working on searching for super endangered, really cute dragons, so Agamidae lizards. I am based over here in Perth, Western Australia. The dragons are based in Queensland. It's kind of a long story, but I have a deep history of working in Queensland, and we ended up getting this project going as a kind of cost sharing partnership, which was really fun. So my proposal is to kind of run through various different kind of parts of the decision-making process about the project, things like how we thought about safety, some of the logistics, as well as the science, a bit about the dragons, etc. If there's a particular thing that you'd like to dive into more, because that's your interest, then I can definitely tailor it. So do drop that in the chat for Lauren to kind of say, hey, Anne really wants to hear more about the dragon genetics. Can you talk about that some more? And if that is a thing that I know, then I will dive into it a bit more. Yeah, so without further ado, there we go. This is the Condamine Earless Dragon, Tympanocryptus condamensis. It is one of 8 species of Tympanocryptus in what we call the earless dragon group. They're very adorable, as you can see from this picture. The whole group is very adorable. Some of you might have seen one species in the group was thought to be extinct in Victoria, so down south on the east coast of Australia. And some of the folks from Zoos Victoria are also, it was rediscovered last year, and now there's a captive breeding program, and some of the folks from Zoos Victoria have been working on that species. That one is a member of the southern clade, of which there's 5 species. Oh, I should also say, I don't know if everyone knows this, but I am a research ecologist, and I'm working in ecology for the last 15 years. It is really weird looking at my slides and nobody's face. But anyway, feel like I'm just talking to the dragon. But if I use any terms that are a bit too sciencey because that's not your background, please just drop it in the chat and Lauren just interrupt me so I can define any of those if that comes up. So yeah, those there's 5 southern species, and they have a slightly different ecology to the northern species, so they like to live in spider burrows. This is one of 3 species in the northern clade, and we have something called, we call it the cracking clay, but it's this really fine, highly productive soil that you find in kind of flat floodplain type areas. And it expands and contracts. So I think you find that kind of in the middle of the US as well, that type of thing. So it expands and contracts, and in the summer, you get these big, deep cracks. And we don't actually know that much about this species, but we think that it lives in the big, deep cracks, not cracks. We found a bunch of juveniles last year, which is really exciting. I don't think anyone has found, for this species, eggs in the wild yet, although it's possible that our resident species expert, Rod Hobson, may have. So there is kind of a lot to sort of unpack, a lot of unknowns about this species. This is the area, just for those of you that aren't in Australia and kind of, or may not have heard of the species. So you can see on the left, Australia, and this pink blob up near Brisbane, about halfway up on the east coast. That's the Condamine floodplain. That's where it lives. And then when we zoom in on the right, you can kind of see the area that it occurs. And it's really not a very big area. It's a single floodplain complex. It's quite a large floodplain complex that extends a couple of 100 kilometers, but it lives only there and nowhere else in the entire world. It is a highly transformed environment. This is an aerial shot from one of our main field sites. So you can see these little strips on either side of the road. That is mostly native-ish grass. And the dragons are, this is probably the best site, the most, with the most dragons that we've recorded. And the dragons live alongside agriculture, strangely enough, along all of these, or happily enough, in all these bits of grassland. They do also occur in the crops, but it's not clear. They're found in some parts of the cropland and not other parts of the cropland, and it's not entirely clear what drives that. And so one of the big questions that we have as part of the overall research program is what's driving that. They're incredibly cryptic, and what you might have seen from the previous slide is that they look a lot like the ground. And they also go kind of in those big cracks, and they go under the grass. The current survey method involves kind of getting on the edge of the grass here, or perhaps in the middle of it, and driving along as like basically just let the clutch out. So you're kind of idling. It's at like 4 kilometers an hour, and you kind of look out either side and see if you can see them. It's surprisingly more effective than walking. I think that, as with many species, the car is just like a novel item where people are clearly a potential predator. So they go, they sort of move away. It's much easier to see them from the car. And I think also when you're walking, you kind of have to look where you're going. So you might ask yourself, okay, you've got a survey method already. Why do you need dogs? What I did mean to say with this aerial shot is you can see that a lot of the landscape is really, really transformed. This is the middle. This is really, really productive land. So this is the middle of the food growing region in kind of Australia. It grows a lot of our grains as wheat, cotton, and sorghum. As the cotton and sorghum being the rotation crops. But it's like a lot of the East Coast wheat is grown here, and it's laser flat, like all these fields have been leveled, but the floodplain is very flat in general. And the species hasn't been recorded on, there are some like granite hills and stuff kind of towards the edges. The species hasn't been recorded there. This one, we think it is a floodplain specialist. So that being said, why do we need dogs? You've got a survey method, but they're also very cryptic. They look a lot like the ground. And I don't know if I put the photo in here. We'll see if I find it later. But and if I haven't, I'll put it in the chat or something like that. But I've got a picture of a dragon actually curled in underneath the grass that Evie located when we were doing the pilot. I literally could not see it. I was looking at it and I could not see it. And I've been working on lizards on and off for probably 15 years. So, you know, it's not like I just started learning how to look for lizards and I have a terrible search image. So they can be really, really hard to see. They also, at the moment, we can only survey them when they're out and active. Ooh. I think I must have put my phone on snooze. Sorry about that. Sorry, my computer is beeping. My apologies. I don't really know why. I'm just gonna, okay, there we go. It's gone. Right. So right now we can only survey them in September every year when, well, September through probably October. So after October, the rains come, the water fills up with soil and you kind of just sink into it. And the farmers don't want you on it because you kind of ruin their nice fields. And also it's super dangerous because you just sink in. Like people have lost entire vehicles in the black soil. Yeah. But there's also the kind of winter. So from say February through when we start surveying in September, is a kind of a dead zone from a surveying perspective, and we don't know what they're doing during that time. We act like one of the main questions we have is what happens when it floods. Do they go in the holes? Do they you know, wrap themselves up and have some special breathing system like some of our frogs? Are there refuge areas that they move to? Some of the other species, one of the other species has had a tracking study on it, and that species had a maximum home range of about 100 meters. So it seems unlikely that they'd be moving sufficient distance that they'd be able to move to a refuge, or at least a lot of them. Is there something stochastic going on? Do they die? Like just this massive hole in the life history. So anything that we might be able to do to kind of expand the survey window or help us to understand that would be really helpful. If the dogs could detect them in the cracks, then we would know more about where they are. And also, if the dogs are detecting them anywhere that's not visually accessible to people, that would be really helpful. In addition to the agriculture that's happening in this area, there's also various kind of development, and it'd be really helpful to have a method that would give us greater confidence that we've fully cleared an area to say, yes, there are dragons, or no, there aren't, before any of those activities are happening. So that's the kind of impetus for this species. And some of my colleagues were kind of sitting around one day and they just rang me up and said, do you use dogs for this project? And I have this sort of deep history in Queensland. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll help you out. So off we went. This is us searching in the field. I think I'm going to probably go here first. I chose Evie, the dog you saw in the picture, as for the project. We're only using one dog because we have like not very much funding, and I live on the opposite side of the country, so we have to go over there. Ironically, because of the system, the leverage that we came up with, it's still kind of cheaper to do it this way than to, you know, train a dog from scratch, basically, which would have been the alternative option for the team. And that has, you know, welfare considerations, given that none of the folks in the team are obviously dog folks. That was really important to think about. So Evie is in the middle, and the reason we selected her for the project, so these are my 3 working detection dogs, and obviously it's important to introduce them. On the left is Dallas. She's the blonde one. And that's her when we're in the Pilbara. looking for bat roosts. So we're having a nice rest because it's a bit hot there until she cools down. And then that's me and Evie in the Pilbara in the middle, and Evie's really little. And then that's my boy Merlin on the right. So they all have different strengths, but one of Evie's strengths is that is something that people might think is a weakness in other situations, but which is that she likes to search quite close to me. But it's really helpful because when she does drive away from me, which she will do for odor, it's really clear that she's moving into odor. And because the time of year that we are working, and I'm going to talk a bit more about the safety in a minute, because the time of year that we're working is quite warm, and we schedule to be before the rain, so there's limited snake activity, but it is possible that there might be snakes. We do live in Australia. There's a lot less than in Perth, but venomous snakes do inhabit the area. So having her working really close into me is really helpful in terms of a safety strategy, because I can see where she is. And because the advantage in this situation isn't that she can clear an area quickly, it's that her nose is able to find individuals that I can't, then that's not a downside for the project. It's actually an upside. So that was one of the reasons. She's also probably all of the dogs are trained to ignore wildlife, but Evie just like doesn't care about it at all. Like not even she doesn't even like she just I've got a video of her just like literally walking past like a bearded dragon, like within a couple of centimeters to find her target species. So if she hasn't been trained to find it, she won't even look at it. Like you can put her in the middle of like just like an exploding aviary of birds and there's nothing. So given that it was going to be a live target, because she was the most neutral of all the dogs, that was another reason that we selected her. Yeah. I think those are probably the two main reasons. But she's also got a really sensitive nose. And so and she's very methodical, and that was advantageous for this type of project as well. I think the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I think a lot of people skip over these types of things when you see like a scientific presentation or something like that. And I think it's really interesting to consider the different strengths of our dogs. Right, I'm going to talk about the safety now. So, and logistics. She's also, another reason I selected Evie was because we'd be flying back and forth, and she just could care less about, all of the dogs will fly, but she just is like she doesn't even really need a rest afterwards. It's like a normal day. She doesn't care. We schedule rest day in afterwards just so that she can decompress in case it was anything, but that gives me it's just like a low stress situation because I know that she doesn't care. So here we are out in the field. You can see it's pretty hot. It's big open space. This is the grassland that we're searching in, and Evie with her ball. So some of the things that we thought about when we were planning the project and deciding whether to go ahead or not were how remote it was and the ability to access medical services, the heat, and also the venomous snake situation. So the biggest risks out here are going to be heat, snakes, and farmers' dogs, and like rat poison and that kind of thing. So some of the things we did to mitigate heat were Evie and Dallas have been temperature conditioned to work in hot areas, and they've previously gone up to the Pilbara, which if you're not from Australia, you probably don't know what that is, but it is this incredible gorge country, and it's quite warm, and so is that Aaron laughing? Anyway, so I knew that they were capable of working safely in those environments. And also, as we were coming out of winter, because we scheduled this trip in the early season to avoid snake activity. Then we also did a lot of temperature conditioning. So as we come into this project, we do a lot of like going for a run at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to get Evie to a point where it's it's within the 5 degrees above her standard operating temperature that she's used to, and we slowly build up the duration of that, and also kind of operational style searches within the warmer parts of the day. We also modify the search strategy so that there's rests. So we do 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, and if we need to, we can shorten that more. I always have the vehicles, we fit them with a fridge, we bring ice packs, we have a frozen t-shirt. We have frozen t-shirts so we can get them out and then use them and even put them on the dogs. And we have heaps and heaps and heaps of water. And I carry that normally. We're just right next to the car doing a pilot search here. But if we're going to go anywhere more than 100 meters away from the car, I'll be carrying a few liters of water, even if I can still see the vehicle. So those are some of the things we did for heat. In terms of venomous snakes, we have a spotter, a student, who comes with us and checks any areas that might be a bit longer. I chose Evie because she'll work closer to me. If there's live crop, I won't have her search that. And that's not just because of the snakes. It's also because there's massive deep cracks that I don't want her falling into. But there are little cracks in under here, which the dragons could be hiding in. But if there's a 6-meter deep crack, I don't want to be going in there, and I don't want my dog going in there either. So those areas will have to be searched when there's not live crop cover on there. The crop sucks all the water out of the soil. Let's see. And then the other thing we did was actually a lot of this is, technically this is a road reserve, so we're allowed to legally access it, but it's, right adjacent to people's fields, and this is their like home and their livelihood. And, it's really, really important to have really good relationships with the landholders in this situation. So we actually went and met all of the landholders whose land we were working on. There's a kind of ongoing research effort, but we went to the trouble of, myself and Evie went to meet them and chat about what we were doing. So when they saw us kind of on the side of the road, around on their land, they didn't think we were creepy. Although I do have a funny story about when we were working next to kind of a public reserve, and these people, slowed down to ask us what we were doing. And my student said, oh, we're hunting dragons. And I think that the person kind of just gave them a weird look. I'm fairly sure he thought they were like, on LSD or something, because they're just here in this long grass on the side of the road on the highway looking for dragons. Yeah, I wasn't there that day, but so yeah, we went ahead and we got these really, really strong relationships with all the folks in the community. So that drone shot, actually, one of the farmers took that for us with her drone. And it was always an exciting day when we met a new landholder. So one of the things I like to teach all my students and everyone is to like stop. Sometimes it'll throw your surveys off, but if anyone comes and wants to talk to you, you really need those people skills to stop and, tell them what you're doing and, do a little demo and that kind of thing. So yeah, those are the safety considerations. There's a lot of logistics as well. It's very remote. The last one I wanted to talk about is, as well as having the spotter and the scheduling for the snakes, we also have all of the kind of the 3 small towns, because Australia is Australia. All of those 3 small towns have a vet with the hyperbaric chamber and anti-venom. So we just kind of had all of their contact information on a sheet, and whatever the closest one was, we would drive straight there if there was any problem at all. And I have training in dog CPR. So any of the black snakes you can do CPR, and because they have respiratory distress, and 2 of the 3 main threats are black snakes. So that's really good. Wow. Hopefully I never have to use that, but it's good to know that is an effective first aid measure. Yeah, okay. I think that's it, unless there's any questions about that. The training process was pretty simple. We did talk about using training aids, and we did collect some using when we started the project, the Gets and Tubes had just come out, and it wasn't really clear how they would work for live targets or how long you had to do them. So the training aids we collected were cotton swabs, which we had ethics to retain the lizards overnight and then release them at the same time the following day. So we kind of put the cotton swabs in with the lizards. I didn't end up using them, but we collected them just in case, because actually one of the things that I was really worried about, that we talked about a lot before we started the project, was the year before we went out, the research assistant only found 7 individuals. Last year, we found a couple of really good sites, and we ended up finding a couple hundred. And so it was a really good year to train, but it may have just been a really good year. So there's definitely some kind of cyclic boom bust, environmentally condition mediated stuff going on with the species. So it was a real concern that we weren't actually going to find any. So when the students did find individuals before we went out, then I had them collect some odor using that protocol. Now we'll probably use some Gets and Tubes suspended in the headspace of that box to collect a little bit of additional training odor. But because we wanted to pinpoint live individuals as part of the pilot program, I wanted to imprint on live individuals. So these are my little pots. They're completely, you can see them here. They're completely opaque with holes drilled in them. So because the lizards can't see the dogs, even though they can smell them, and because their defense strategy is to hide and freeze, this is actually really nice. So they don't, it's just similar to if birds are going past them or whatever, they feel like they've got a safe place. So I use these pots, just pretty standard imprinting protocol, with first getting good exposure to odor, then doing some lineups indoors, taking that outdoors on the road, and then burying them so that they weren't visible, and ensuring we were still getting a good indication during appropriate times of day for no longer than 10 minutes with the lizards before we rotated to a different individual under our ethics permit. Then we also, so this is a more interesting part potentially of the training process. Once Evie was accurately indicating in all of those phases, we'd progress to the next phase. So that was my performance criteria for progression in the progression plan. And it was really important to stick to that because we had a live target. So I wanted to make sure we had good passive indications before we moved on to all of those phases. Because once the lizards were moving, that was obviously going to be more exciting. So I wanted to kind of proof against that ahead of time. And then the other thing that we did was I went out and we went into similar environments and even some places where there were dragons once we had done the initial imprinting, and I just seeded it with her training odor to give her that environmental optimism. So I don't know if anyone's familiar with the literature around judgment bias, but there's some really interesting research showing that if you kind of go to a place and maybe you search on 2 roads, and on one there's never any targets and the other there's targets, and you only have to do that a few times before the dog's like sniff rate lowers, and and they just kind of dismissed that location. So what we did to avoid that happening, because this was a novel environment that we didn't work in on a regular basis, was set out a bunch of her training targets, which in this case is Kong, and just kind of learn that this is an amazing place. And you see that change. Like once you've done that a few times, they get out of the car and they're like, yes, it's the place with all the things. And then you take the targets away and do long blanks, and it doesn't change that. So it's really cool. You can use that judgment bias for good. Rather than getting the negative, you can kind of just bias them to think that this context is always going to be amazing. So I did that on purpose. I don't know, maybe everyone does that, but I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it. So I thought it might be of interest, particularly to some of the new folks here. Then we did some work on inaccessible and buried odor in the lead up. So deep inaccessible targets, so where there is access to the odor, but it's quite far away, up to about 3 or 4 meters, and then buried odor only up to about a foot, because actually the dragons are likely to be just under the grass or in an open context. So while we could have done more, and I probably will continue to develop that, given the timeline that we had, we just did a little bit. But I do think that definitely helped. Once we had the dragons in the field, we worked on known released individuals to test that she was sourcing and indicating correctly. Then once I was confident that was happening, then the students would release them. This was actually, I think I might have said this in different conversations, but this is actually really funny because at first I had the students stand like on the opposite who had released it, release the dragon and go around and touch some few things and kind of contaminate the area so that it wasn't a human scent bias. And then like stand on the opposite side of the road and just kind of watch with binoculars to see if the dragon was still there, just so that we knew that we were accurately assessing whether she'd found it or not. But after 2 goes, Evie just raced to where the student was and then started searching. So I ended up having to like string out a bunch of students along the road, and then very quickly transitioned out of this phase once we'd got the right number of ticks in the box, because it's just amazing how fast they pick up on those additional cues. And then they released them and just kind of followed me, so facilitated blinds, because and then so sort of one of the challenges that we faced in that part of the transition was that so she picks up odor really fast, but this particular site, I actually think there must be odor everywhere because there's quite a lot of dragons. We found 16 in this sort of 5-kilometer strip, which doesn't seem like that many, but I'm pretty sure we're missing a lot. So there's probably dragons everywhere, and they do move around, so there's residual. And she was picking up the odor and kind of sourcing roughly to the general area, but struggling to pinpoint. I mean, and that was fine because we're a team and I could see the dragon sometimes, but sometimes I couldn't. If they kind of went under the grass, she actually didn't have that much of a problem with that. But sometimes they would stay on top and then zip away, and she would source to kind of where they had been before. So either there's just more odor there because they've been sitting there for a longer time or whatever, or I have a question mark. Perhaps there's some sort of olfactory camouflage, like a scent dump or some particular fear signal or pheromone that they leave when they're like running away. So she would often source to where they were before, and then she would kind of loop around, but depending on how far they went, it might take her a while to pinpoint there. So that was something we really worked on in that part of the thing, and it was helpful for me to have the student there in that facilitated context who'd released it saying that's where I released it. So I knew she was correct. So I actually rewarded her for that behavior a few times in that transition to support her until we had good pinpointing. There was also kind of another challenge that we identified there, which was that sometimes the dragons go in these little depressions and they go flat. And I think that that's another form of olfactory camouflage, perhaps because of the wind movement. I don't know, folks who work on turtles or other species like that, I'd be super interested, who go in little depressions. I'd be super interested to hear your take on that. But anyway, when they're in those little depressions, she did struggle to source them. So we had to kind of work on some scent theory and environmental patterning to get her searching in those dips, and sort of try to troubleshoot that. And then we worked on released individuals in a double blind context. And the detection, and we did still face some of those, but we got to a good point at the end of the last field season, basically. I did notice that maybe she was sniffing a bit harder when she encountered human odor. So at the next phase of our project, I just talked about all of these things. The next phase of our project this year will include tracked individuals. So they've been released yesterday, and we'll go back and into that general area, and then we'll search for them. And that would be our kind of like essentially would be our ORT as well. So to the end of the pilot. There's additional research planned with a comparison to human only surveys, and also establishing detection rates. Yeah, so that's kind of all I've got for today. And I wanted to leave a bunch of time for questions because there's lots of different paths that we could go down. If you want to keep track of the dragons, I usually post a bunch of stuff on my social media throughout the season.
Awesome. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, perfect. Earlier, I don't know, somehow my audio got a bit messed up, but that was awesome. Yeah, we have a few questions. The first one was about kind of like the average daily temperatures that you are working in.
Yeah. So around that time of year, it starts around during the day, sorry. It gets down to like a reasonable temperature in the kind of September, October period, like maybe 12. Australia's kind of Australia. Maybe around 12. But during the day, it's getting up to around 30 in the middle of the day. And even potentially a little bit above that, but 30 is my cutoff for Evie, particularly with the humidity. And then, but the temperatures that typically we're working in that period when the lizards come out is between about 19 and 26 is when I try to target, but yeah, it does get up a bit higher. So we, if it gets above kind of 28, then we start shortening our search period. So instead of doing 20 minutes, we do 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off. And yeah, that's the temperature range. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And then when you were talking about the bias, if you have any like citations that you could share, and maybe you can put these in Slack or WhatsApp if you don't have them handy now.
I don't have them handy, but I can take that one that I'm thinking up about the judgment bias. It's not environmental bias, they call it judgment bias. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so the next question was, so training, so you train on live dragons themselves and not the cotton balls with odor. So I guess that's
correct. Yeah. So I kind of picked up the cotton balls as a just in case there were no dragons, because I definitely experienced some sleepless nights in advance. That we would go all the way there, spend all this money, and then there wouldn't be any dragons and it wouldn't go well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so kind of a second part to that. So with the live dragons, kind of like, how did you care for them and how long did you keep them?
Yeah. Okay. So we kept them in a small, basically like a Tupperware, with a bunch of holes drilled in it, so that they had good airflow. And we put them in an area that had airflow that was hidden from people and dogs, so they weren't stressed by people going past. And we put like a visual barrier, so they felt safe. And we gave them the cotton, stuff both to collect odor, and also it serves as a refuge, so they're much happier when they have somewhere to go. We just made sure the temperature wasn't too hot and wasn't too cold. So we stayed in a cabin so that we had temperature control while we had the dragons with us. Like Evie enjoyed having the air conditioning when it was nice and humid as well, and I definitely did. But the reason that we spent the money was because of the dragons, because Evie and I had the car, and then it was cool enough overnight that it wasn't a concern. But it was definitely helpful from a logistical concept standpoint. And then so yeah, they actually prefer a smaller. It was kind of a whole thing with the ethics folks, because they actually prefer that small space. Like, I think they're used to working in these tiny little cracks and they squish themselves in. And if you put them in a big area, they just kind of panic because they are in a big area and they have nowhere to hide. So we just made sure they had refuge. It's only 24 hours. Lizards typically don't eat that often. You can just, I've had lizards in captivity, and you can, just give them like one cricket a day. Or, and if they go a couple days without, of this size, sorry, they're quite small, like they're basically a hand size. Sorry, I heard sound. Is someone trying to clarify about that?
I heard someone. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we basically just put them in like takeaway containers with cotton, and make sure their temperature is good. We don't feed them, because that avoids us giving them the wrong thing. We only have them for 24 hours. We release them in exactly the same place that we found them. We think their home range is very small, and that may be very important. So we release them on the GPS point, so within 5 meters, that's the error of the GPS, of the location that we found them. And we actually flag the specific location. So it should be exactly where we found them.
I have a follow-up question for that. How did you get them in the first place for training? Because that's the stuff that makes me lose sleep at night. So how did you obtain the lizards to begin with?
So we did human surveys.
Okay.
And like crossed our fingers really hard that we were
Oh my God.
So This is why the sleepless nights in advance, because I was like the student that you found 7. And we only had like a month, and I was like, are we even going to find any dragons? Like, there was a lot of anxiety about that. And so then what you do is you drive. There's a driver, a passenger, and if you're lucky, you've got a couple extra volunteers. So then you have 4 people. And then when someone sees the dragon, you stop the car, but don't turn the engine off, because that might disturb them. The person on the other side of the vehicle to the observer carefully puts on a glove, opens the door with their other hand, creeps around the back so that the car is like a body pressure, and the other and then your body pressure, but not like, but kind of adjacent to the car, because you don't want them to go under the car, and then you can sort of creep, and then you just dive and flat hand them. So if anyone's a lizard person, so you just kind of go, no one can see my hand, right? Because it's on the screen.
Yeah, we can.
Oh,
yeah,
you can.
see
you just kind of like flat them. So if you grab them, then you might hurt them. But if you flat them, they're used to squishing themselves, and so they'll just that won't hurt them. It's not enough pressure unless you like deliberately try to squash them. So you just flat hand them, pick them up, and then put them in the thing. But it is a kind of learned skill.
So you're doing all this training on site, basically. Like you're doing this kind of on the fly.
It's in the field,
essentially.
yeah. So it's
Yeah,
not
wow.
yeah, there's not a lot of like training. That was an option with the cotton swabs, but I really wanted to avoid that after having spoken to a bunch of people working on live targets about potential residual problems. I mean, yeah, like down the track, actually, it may be advantageous. Like, so phase 2, if we can get any funding, maybe to train a dog on residual, because in some situations, like now that we've got clear proof of concept for the regulators that the dogs can find the dragons, we've got proof. You know, like it may be advantageous in these areas where there's really low densities. So we've been working in the one place where we know there's lots of them because of wanting to train in the field, but there's potentially really, really low densities. So any hint of dragon will let us know that they're present, and presence triggers a bunch of regulatory follow-up. So like for additional survey funding, pre-clearance surveys, that type of thing. So yeah, down the track, we may want to train them on the residual, but I was really concerned about not doing that because I knew we needed to pinpoint them for the pilot project. Yeah.
Great. We've got a couple other questions. So one, in the area that you were surveying for this project, estimated population, do you guys have a number for that?
We hope that we will be able to do that. Basically, we don't know what the detection rate of people is. We don't know how many dragons there are. There's at least 100 because that's how many individuals we caught.
Okay.
Part of the project is we're doing a photo mark recapture project. So every time we caught one of the dragons, before we released it, we would measure them, weigh them, take tail tips for genetics, unless they'd already had been caught before, and take photos. So one of the other species, someone a couple years ago identified that you were able to use the back patterns for individual recognition. So we're hoping that down the track we'll be able to estimate the population with the mark recapture study. It's really tricky though, because it's, you know, a couple 100 kilometers and all these tiny little roadside verges. And so, it seems like the number of individuals is incredibly variable, but it's really hard to pick apart availability versus versus suitability. So are they just not out for some reason, or is this not a good location for them, versus detectability? Like, are we just not seeing them because the grass at this side's a bit longer, or the road's a bit steeper or whatever? So it's really hard to pick that apart, but it's like probably a few thousand, maybe up to like 20,000. They're listed not on population number, but on range restriction. So because they're less than 2,000 kilometers squared, they meet the criteria for vulnerable under the IUCN Red List. Actually, they meet the criteria for endangered because they're less than 500 kilometers squared. So even without knowing anything really about the population, it's possible that there's hardly any, and it's also possible that we're missing millions of them. So actually this field season, we have an honor student doing a human detection survey with my poor colleagues are just super demoralized after the pilot. I have these like fake dragons. They're like model dragons. We were going to 3D print them, but there's no scanner at the university that does the job. So instead we just bought these like tiny bearded dragon replicas that are pretty close, and we're going to paint them. But anyway, basically all the researchers have to go searching for the model toys, which should give us at least a plausible lower bound of detection rates. It doesn't include movement, but yeah, but they were super demoralized because the first one I did, April didn't find the main researcher. She didn't find any, and she was like, "Oh my God, this is the worst." But the ravens were actually stealing some of them, so that's a whole thing anyway as well.
I believe that.
Darn corvids.
Yeah,
I believe that.
They're so smart.
Yeah.
That's probably the only lizard I could actually catch, honestly. I watch people do it and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't have that skill.
What lizard?
The fake ones.
No, the fake ones.
The fake ones.
Not
Yeah,
that
they're
fast.
really tricky lizards. Can I
Not that fast.
who said, Lauralee, did you say iguanas do, were you talking about olfactory camouflage? Or
Yeah. There was a chemist I was at a what am I trying to say? Convention doing a presentation. And he works at FIU, and they had done a
Yeah.
study with iguanas, and apparently they do that. It's the first time I'd heard of it. So when you said that, I was like, "Hey, iguanas do it too," because there is a definitely olfactory masking behavior that they do when they're under stress. So I don't think it's fully understood, but he was telling me about that as well. He's at FIU, so he took over Ken Furton's lab
cool.
there.
I'd love
So
to-
I just thought you said that, and I went, "Oh yeah, I've actually heard that before." So I haven't gone down that rabbit hole too much, but
Yeah,
definitely have
it's
heard
really cool. There's like anecdotal evidence that turtles
right.
do something, and
Yep.
snakes as well, because certain times of
Yep.
year they're just really, really difficult to detect despite being active.
Yep.
And like the detection distances will just wildly change for no apparent reason. So I think it's a general reptile adaptation to being a cold-blooded thing and prey and that.
I think he was commenting that it's like you said, it's very anecdotal. They're not clear if it's a masking, like, does the odor just go away? Like, do they just become not
Is it
smelly
chemical or
anymore?
behavioral? Yeah.
Correct. Or are they actually changing their chemical signature so that it's a completely different signature that the dog is not picking up, or the predator is not picking up on? I don't think it's fully understood, but it's really cool. Anyway.
Oh, I fished for my honest lizards, Nathan. Except we didn't use a noose because they were too smart. I think they thought it was a snake because they're hunted by small-eyed snakes, which are also black, and the noose was black. And we so I literally fished for the dragon for my honest lizards because they live in these big rocks. So I'd like jiggle the thing, and then I'd swing them into a bucket. Like, there's some very entertaining ways to catch lizards out there. Yeah. Oh, that's really cool, Lauralee. That's so interesting to me. I think, yeah, I reckon it's both, and I think there's also like a chemical, like kind of like octopuses doing ink. Like, I think there's something like a chemical distraction component as well. So it's made me really interested in olfactory camouflage. So
well, when you commented that the dogs were going to where the lizard had just been, and then right before it darts, that's what he was seeing with the iguanas. The dog would go to where it was last stationary, and then as soon as that thing would take off, the dogs just lose it completely. So it's really fast. Someone needs to do some PhD student needs to do a paper on that. Anyway.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. I see, and Nathan, you had a couple questions. I'll see if I can answer them. I didn't answer about the population. What management occurs of the grass areas? Yeah, so the farmers mow them, but not all of them. It depends. That particular site that I was showing where we did a lot of our training had been mown. They do it when they plant, so they don't mow it all the time, but when they're going to plant, and they were kind of just like waiting for the rain. They're like, come on rain at that point. So they'd sort of pre-mowed it ahead of that. I don't know how it impacts the species. The main way I think it probably impacts the species is because the mowing, the blades shouldn't get them, and they do move out of the way of vehicles. So I think they probably don't get mown. When they till, I think that does. When they till the fields, like the farmers always are telling us they saw them from their tractor. I don't know if the tractor is just like a really good vantage point. I kind of want to do a tractor survey at some point. Or I think that because they're tilling it, they're disturbing the kind of bit of the environment that the dragons use. So then they kind of move out of the way of the machine. I don't know the name of the tilling machine. Like if it's just the tractor with an attachment, I'm not a very good farmer. So that definitely does disturb them in some way, but they do still live in the field, so it can't be like lethal. But potentially, you know, they exist for a bit and then they move into the side of the field or something like that. So that's one thing. Can other strips of grass be incorporated in the field to aid habitat connectivity via incentives for farmers? It's a good question. It is the farmers here are not in want of money. Like, it is very, very productive land. So it would cost a lot to do that. But some of the farmers that we work with are like, they're all super on board. They're all really nice. And they kind of love the dragons because they coexist with them and they're in their land. And so it's this like really nice kind of relationship. And also because the dragons are endangered, they're kind of protecting their land from gas exploration. So the farmers are really keen on the dragons, and we have really good relationship. And some of them have like certain parts of their land that they do like dryland grazing, and so they do different management for the dragons there. There's some parts where we've been kind of trying to put more native species in there. But I think my feeling, but we don't really know, we'd have to do a proper study. My feeling is that as long as there's good cover, the dragons are fine. The main thing that would happen when you mow the grass is they may be subject to additional predation pressure from corvids and like small kestrels and that kind of thing. Which it is interesting because that site doesn't have a power line on it and there's way more dragons. And so we put in some funding to try and do a comparative experiment about whether the corvid density and the power lines has an impact on them or not, because it may be that we're just facilitating greater predation pressure. There's so many questions because we know hardly anything about them. Hopefully that answered some of those things. Are there any more questions that I missed, Lauren?
I think we got to them. If we missed your question, feel free to type it in the chat again.
Oh, there's one here about from Erin. I didn't notice a difference in odor availability, but the temperature range that we're working in is quite a good range for odor availability. Like, it's just generally warm. Like that kind of 19 to 24. I do notice changes in odor availability in other things in cooler temperatures, and so I anticipate if we transition to winter that will be a challenge. And I particularly notice the detection distance goes to pot when I'm using their training odor. So who knows, the dragons may behave differently.
Yeah, because
when it's cold and it's
reptiles don't have a lot of odor, is that right?
Yeah, so the detection distance is quite small. It's like a few meters. But yeah, I didn't notice it. Yeah, I didn't mention that at all in the presentation. I probably should have.
I thought I might have missed it, but yeah, like I was thinking, I'm sure I've heard that somewhere, probably from you.
Yeah, no, it's really small. I did, when it was really windy and they were out in the open, I reckon she got them from, and it was warm, I reckon she got them from 15 meters. But when they're but when they're under the grass, it's like less than a meter. So it's more like what they're doing makes the biggest difference. Like, I do think there probably is an effective temperature, and that particularly if they're in the cracks, that will make a big difference, because with the Kong, as soon as the temperature gets below about 7. Oh, by the way, all my temperatures have been in Celsius, so my apologies to all the Fahrenheit people. If you need a translation, please let me know. When it gets to like 7, I notice they kind of really need to be, especially if it's a small target, they really need to be kind of on top of it or within a meter or so. Otherwise they miss it.
Because that was going to be my next question, is like, is this a useful survey methodology for all earless dragons, or do you think it's like really like some of those the earless dragons in Southern Australia, you know, would there be less odor because they're in a cooler environment?
Potentially. I think it depends on the objectives and what those kind of current survey system is. So like for some of the ones in Canberra, they've got these kind of like standard tubes that they take, and because the dragons all live in the wolf burrows, which you can clearly wolf spider, not the wolf.
Wait, what?
Because they live in the wolf spider burrows, they have that kind of standard method they can do where you can go back and just check if they're in there or they're utilizing that. And they also have the scat, which is kind of an indicator because it builds up around. But even if there was scat building up for the northern ones, I don't know if you'd see it because it's exactly the same color as the black soil. And I think with the humidity and the temperature and the rain, it would break down. I'm interested. I know Latoya from Zoos Victoria has done a study on scat persistence for their dragons, and I'm really interested to see the results. I'm very sad that I didn't get to go to the herpetology conference in Borneo because she presented it. But I think if you want to clear an area and you're going to do a systematic search, then the dogs probably are superior. You just have to do it quite tight pattern if it was cooler, but like you could also just be doing surveys at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Victoria. Like there's obvious, you know, so and you can also check. It's more of a like kind of like a bag checking or whatever exercise. You can see wolf spider burrows pretty well, so you can just have them check every single burrow as well. So that potentially helps speed up the evaluation process. Yeah,
cool. Thank you.
Yeah, but like maybe the Canberra ones, you don't need it, kind of thing. It's hard to know. It just sort of depends on the objectives, I think. Yeah. Did I miss anyone else's questions?
What was Evie's favorite part?
I think Evie really liked the dragons. Like when she was like, hey, my target odor moves, like her tail started like wagging. She was like, the target's moving, Meg. And she looked at me like, it's gone over. Do I stay with the target odor? What do I do? Like, I think she found that really interesting. Like, and she's not really a chaser like in the rest of life. So I think the fact that her target odor was moving was super interesting to her specifically. And she also was like, I don't know if I should follow it or stay here, like, because she's done her invitation. So I ended up teaching her to follow it because that was helpful to me. But that was, she definitely really liked that. And I think she just loves, she's a really, she loves people. And I think she just really loved getting 24/7 solo time in the field with me, because usually there's 4 of them and I have to share my love with everybody. And so I think she really enjoyed her one-on-one time as well.
Nice.
All right, well, I'm gonna kind of wrap us. I think we got all our questions. If something else pops in your brain later, feel free to jump on the on Slack, or you can email us and we can try to kick those over to Megan. Her contact information is up on the screen right now. That's her website, Detection for Good. Remember, she's in Australia, so she doesn't get back to you right away. It's probably because she's asleep. But yeah, I will, hopefully, Megan, we can get the citation for the judgment bias and share that, because I know that would be interesting to me. I'm sure others would enjoy that.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be it. I'm going to stop the recording. We'll have that posted later today or tomorrow. And I just want to thank Megan Barnes. That was an awesome presentation. And I think reptiles are so tricky. It's always just such a challenge, and it's just good to hear how people are tackling those challenges. So thank you for sharing your experience with us. And Lauren, thanks for manning the chat.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan.
Have a great one.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
All right, thanks everybody.